Morning. Welcome to the meeting of the Planning and Regulatory Committee. My name is Councillor Julie Costley and I'm the chair of this committee. Before we continue with the meeting, I'll just go over some general housekeeping. This meeting is being held in person at County Hall and is also being streamed live on the County Council's YouTube channel. The recording will be available to view afterwards. Under the Council's protocol on the use of media equipment at meetings held in public, this meeting may be filmed, recorded or photographed. Anyone wishing to do so must inform me and ensure that it is done in a way that is clearly visible to everyone present. The wishes of any individual not to be recorded or filmed must be appropriately respected. A fire alarm test is not expected during this meeting, so if the alarms sound, we must evacuate County Hall, and in the event of an emergency, please make your way to the nearest exit and meet at the muster point located on the main car park. So I'm turning now to the first agenda item, and I'm going to ask Lane to provide us with details of any apologies and substitutions.
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies today from Councillor Sue Catchpole, who is substituted by Councillor Brian Watkins. We also have an apology from Councillor Andrew Brown, who is substituted by Councillor Jim Webber. Just also note we've got Councillor Malcolm Latache in attendance as an observer at the back row.
Thank you, Lane. The next item on the agenda is to agree the minutes of the meeting held on Tuesday, the 31st of March 2026. Do any members have comments of accuracy that they would like to raise about these minutes? If you do, please raise your hand. Take that not. So do they need to be signed right now?
Just on the back.
So moving now to declarations of interest, can I ask members if they have any interests to declare related to items on today's agenda, please? No? Nothing, thank you. And we have no items of urgent business today, so we will move straight to item 5 on today's agenda. So this is reference FUL 2025-0026, Aggregate Recycling Facility, 5C Burrell Way Trade Park, Thetford, IP24 3RW. And I'll invite the planning officer to now give us a presentation on this report.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, everybody, sorry. Application at 5C Burrell Way, Thetford. This is a Section 73 planning application which is being recommended for approval, and it seeks retrospective planning permission to regularise variations to the site layout, plant, buildings, footway and lighting at an existing approved aggregate recycling facility where the principle of the use has already been established. The application is as set out in the report, and there are no updates or amendments to report. There are no objections from the statutory consultees, and 3 objections have been received from neighbouring businesses. The development has been built and is in operation, but because the principle has been established, it is only the proposed changes that are for consideration in this application, and those changes do not affect the throughput of waste through the site or the types of waste recycled on the site, and it does not change the process for recycling, neither does it result in any additional HGV movements. So looking at the site itself, it's situated in the town of Thetford. It has good links. I don't know if you can see where the cursor is. The red line there denotes the site. It's based on Burrell Way. It has good links onto London Road and then on to the strategic road network onto the A11. The site is located within an existing industrial area, but a point to note is that the site shares a boundary with the Breckland Forest Site of Special Scientific Interest, SSSI, and the Breckland Special Protection Area, SPA. Because of this proximity, a Habitats Regulations Assessment, an HRA, has been undertaken, which concludes that subject to mitigation relating to lighting, there would be no adverse effect on the integrity of the SPA. Another point, the closest residential development is over 350 metres away. Just a closer view of the application site within the industrial estate and the proximity to the surrounding uses and the waste recycling facilities. There's another waste recycling facility in there. In policy terms, this is a good site because of its being in a town location. It's got good links to the highway, and it's an industrial site as well. So just looking at the differences now, it's a matter of whether what's being proposed is acceptable in the context of the immediate surroundings when compared to what's already been approved. So looking at the layout plan on the left, this is the layout plan which is approved with the original planning permission. And you'll see the plant is around this area where my cursor is, a mobile crusher there, attenuation tanks. The silt press is down on this boundary as well, and as with the storage bays over there. Oh, excuse me. With the new proposed layout, we've got the plant site now runs along this boundary, along there, so it's a difference in the layout. We've got attenuation tanks there. We've got the silt press has been moved up onto this boundary with the storage bays now in the middle of the site, and a mobile crusher being used, would be used in this area. Just looking at a 3D visualization of the site, so you can see that the plant, the bulk of the plant along that edge there, when it's seen in the context of the canopy of the trees. The filter press again, storage bays, and the remainder of the storage bays and the sand plant. So this is a comparison again, looking across the site. So this is the approved with the plant sort of tucked in behind the building there. And now you can see it sort of extends down into the site, and there is a height difference. It is higher. But it needs to be considered in context of the canopies of the tree. It doesn't extend beyond the canopies of the tree. And you've got the adjacent building there, which is of a similar height, and the silt press as well. Just another slide showing the plant itself. So the plant includes a feed conveyor, processing modules which wash and screen the material. There's sand production, and the silts come out at the other end. It's quite neat because the silt press is then in line as well. So the silts are extracted, and they produce a fill material which is also used in construction. Another one of the changes is the footway. So the footway, this slide shows the footway which runs along the boundary of the site. The width has been reduced from 2 metres down to 1.4 metre to accommodate the positions of an existing telegraph pole. The Highways Authority have been consulted and raised no objection to this. And then looking at the comparison between the two drainage schemes, so you see the approved drainage plan on the left as opposed to the proposed drainage plan on the right there. Excuse me. So you've got the pipe work, you know, the pipes look different as it's underground, and then at the bottom of the plan there, you've got the attenuation tanks where the water gathers. It's a self-contained system. so the water gets caught in the attenuation tanks and then pumped back up and then used again in the processing of the minerals. It's cleaned before it's used again. Okay, just to give you a feel for the site itself, here are some photos of the site. So there's the feed hopper of the plant there, and you can see the conveyor running along there. Point to note is the fencing along the boundary with the SPA and the triple SI. Just another view back at the feed hopper with the conveyor belt. Just another internal view looking towards the screens and the sand plant and the tanks where the silt is settled out. A view northwest from the site entrance looking into the site, so the view that the neighbouring properties may well see, which you see from the highway. Another view from within the site looking towards the storage bays. This is actually stood up on top of some of the plant. Got the tank there. There's some lighting on there as well, which is would be subject to a condition. And again, from the highway, looking out onto Burrell Way, looking out away from the site. Okay, so in summary, there's been no objections from the statutory consultees. The principle of the use has already been established. There would be no intensification of the use. The control of the emissions is regulated by the Environment Agency, who haven't raised objection through their permitting regime. The Habitats Regulation Assessment concludes no adverse effect subject to the condition which we've introduced for lighting. Therefore, the recommendation is for refusal. Thank you for your time. Any questions?
Thank you, Neil. So, committee members, yes, it's an opportunity now for us to raise questions about the presentation. Councillor Neil.
Thank you, Chair. I'm live, yeah. I note that you've already taken into account the light mitigation, but you also mentioned the footpath width has been reduced and there was an objection from our highways. What have we done about that?
Sorry, there was no objection from our highways.
Oh, sorry, I thought there was.
Apologise if you
Did I mishear that?
I didn't make that clear. I do apologise.
Yeah, okay.
Councillor Whedon.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask, have we had any sort of complaints about the sort of operation of the site thus far? And if we have, what sort of scale and substance of complaints have we had?
Yeah, there has been complaint raised initially around the plant itself, and that it wasn't built in accordance with the approved schemes. We've had subsequent complaints around noise and dust and emissions from drainage as well. So with these issues around emissions, we're not the regulator for that, so the Environment Agency regulate that. My understanding from contact with the Environment Agency is that they've been monitoring the site, they've been working with the site operator to remedy the harm that has come about through operation, and to the point where they're quite satisfied with the planning application, and that the proposal, if approved, wouldn't cause any harm in terms of emissions.
Councillor Watkins.
Thank you, Chair. The report makes reference to the Breckland local plan as being an important document to take into consideration, and my question would be whether there's anything relevant within that emerging local plan that might be pertinent to this particular application, and if so, what that might be. Thank you.
Well, primarily our minerals and waste local plan is the main document that we use to consider these applications. As far as the emerging local plan at Breckland, if I'm being honest, I'm not aware that there was anything. I don't know whether Ralph or Richard have know the emerging local plan in that amount of detail to be able to answer that.
Yes, sorry, Chair. I think it's, let me just make sure this is right, section 4.2 of the report sets out the Brackland local plan policies that are listed in the applications being appraised against, and they're throughout the report and the appraisal there. So there are, I think there's about 11 relevant policies there that are listed in the report and being considered against the application.
Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to ask you about the dust, what you were talking about, the dust. What is there to limit the dust around in the area? Is there like spray bars or?
Yeah, there's dust suppression on the site. The mobile crusher has its own spray bars on there, so it's quite a small, neat unit. I've seen it in operation, and as it's used, it's sprayed. So there is dust suppression on site. As I say, it's the Environment Agency that would really drill into that, and they monitor and maintain and ensure that there's not any dust emissions from the site.
Okay, thank you, Neil. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Hughes and then Councillor Webber, thank you.
Just for clarification, at the end of your presentation there, I think you said it was recommended for refusal. Can you just confirm you meant approval and not refusal, as per the document?
I do apologise. If I said refusal, I meant approval. Thank you.
The Borrell Way estate all appears to be built to a similar height across the whole estate, but this application includes two buildings that are sort of twice the height of the surrounding premises. I suppose, does it stick out relative to other properties on the estate? And was the original planning permission for the estate, did it have a height limitation in it, perhaps because of some kind of scheme for it? And I suppose linked to that question, other businesses seem to be, what's the word, less dirty. They include a combination of sort of retail type businesses like Screwfix and other businesses that don't have such a significant environmental impact. So is it a bit of an outlier in terms of what's on the estate?
Just in answer to the first question, I'm not aware that there was any original height restrictions on the Burrell Way Industrial Estate that I'm aware of. There are some other buildings on there which are quite tall as well. You've got another waste building on the site. I think Wisers operate that one. That's quite a tall building when you think about the context of this site. Although the plant is taller, it's within that industrial area, and it's visually contained within the SBA with quite a large tree canopy beyond that, and other buildings on the other side of it. In regards to other retail uses and the appropriateness of the proposal, it is an industrial area, so our policies try to direct development, this type of development, into industrial areas, particularly if they're in our towns as well, where a lot of the waste arises from. So I think that on balance, I think this is an appropriate use, providing that the mitigation measures and the environmental permitting regime is doing its job, and we have to assume that it is.
Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of short questions. So I know highways, you say that there's obviously the A11 and you've got good connectivity, but that only factors stuff leaving through the A11. A lot of the time people going, should we say, towards Suffolk are probably actually going to go through the town and out through the back end ways into Suffolk that way. So has proper consideration been factored in for how much congestion this may add through the town centre? Noting the size of some of these vehicles, has the town centre been designed in a way that can actually accommodate a lot of these vehicles safely through? Because I know when you're going towards Nuns Bridges, it's quite tight for cars. The other element, I know you mentioned that we have the Environmental Agency there. You mentioned a lot about lights, but I would imagine crushers and grinders make a lot of noise And now you're saying people are 350 metres away, noise travels. So are there any restrictions on operating hours in place to look at this? And then the final one is obviously this is to normalise a breach of previous conditions. So in other applications coming, unless I'm misunderstood, obviously we've had objections from some of the businesses around. I'm just wondering, does this set a precedent? Thank you.
Just taking each one of those in turn. So the issue around the routing of vehicles in and out of the site, it's already been established through the original planning application. There weren't any routing restrictions put on during that application. So therefore, the point that's for consideration now is the new plant and the new layout. So I think that the principle of that without a routing agreement, of the development without a routing agreement, is already established. So that's the first point on that. With regards to the retrospective nature of the planning application, the planning system is set up in such a way that allows for retrospective planning applications to happen. That's just the way the planning system is. I don't know whether anybody else wants to add anything to that.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just come back on maybe a couple of points. The point about noise, there's a condition 17 that's proposed to be imposed to restrict working hours to Mondays to Fridays only from 7 to 6 o'clock in the evening and from 7 until 5 o'clock on Saturdays. There's no Sunday or evening working. In that respect, if there are any particular noise problems, then if complaints are received, we'd normally speak to the District Council, Environmental Health Officer, as well as the Environment Agency to investigate that and make sure there's no statutory nuisance or breach of environmental permit occurring for the operations. Just to come back on the point about the breach of planning control, yes, technically, if a development's not conforming with a planning permission, then there would be a breach of planning control. But we would have to make a planning judgment as officers of whether there's a realistic chance of those breaches being regularised with a new permission. And this is a case where we've chosen to invite an application rather than go down an enforcement line, given that there is very limited harm arising from the changes proposed as part of this planning application. So whilst it's not always perfect that an operator does something that they don't have planning permission for, it's not illegal, it might be unlawful, but there's a way of regularising it if those changes are meet planning policy, and in this case we've considered that they do.
Councillor White.
Thank you very much for both the explanations. So I note that you said about the highways consideration in the original proposal, but there's equally a change here to some of the operation. So is it something that if there's variations going on in some form of operation, can we expect that there may be variations to more vehicles coming in from the original plan as well? Is this something that may have been factored in?
Sorry, I wasn't sure whether my microphone would work. But, types or levels of traffic visiting the site would be likely to change as a result of what's on the table. But I do agree with you that Thetford is constrained. It is a challenge, and it's something that would receive due consideration if it were a different scenario.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just come back further on that point. There is condition 7 that doesn't request, but it makes sure that the HGV management plan is carried forward from the principal permission, and that's the routing plan to ensure that the majority of vehicles do use the A11.
Councillor Conroy.
Thank you, Chair. You were talking about the lighting limitations. What are they, and are they likely to be able to adhere to them, including the winter?
So there's a condition that is on the report. I'm just trying to find the precise wording now. So it's to prevent glare beyond the boundary of the site. So it's to put canopies on the lights that haven't got canopies on them at the moment, really, just to prevent the light from spilling out onto the SPA and beyond.
So is there a limit on the times that they can be operated, though, the lights?
I think it's during operating hours.
Yeah, okay.
Councillor Whedon.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to come back to the point on the Saturday operating hours. Can you confirm it was 7 a.m. start? And if that is the case, taking into consideration, we've had some complaints in the neighbouring areas, I do think we need to be very mindful of our neighbours. I do think 7 a.m. on a Saturday is early. I'm very interested in the views of others as well on that. But, yeah, I've just got a bit of a concern around that one.
Yeah, those haven't altered from the original planning permission.
I'd like to just add on that. Actually, 7 on a industrial setting is quite a conventional standard operating hour. Obviously, if it was in the vicinity of residential properties, you might be looking at an 8 o'clock start, but because it's an industrial setting, and the objections came in from neighbouring businesses who would probably also be starting at 7. This is considered acceptable in this instance.
No, that's great. I understand your determination on that. My concern is, did you say it's 350 metres away that you've got dwellings and residential setups? That is my overarching concern. I don't know if there is an opportunity maybe to push that back slightly. I remember the days having young children. If something was to wake them up very early, I wouldn't just have grumpy children, I'd have a grumpy wife as well. I do think we need to be mindful of our neighbours.
The only point I would probably add to that is that between the site itself and the residential area, that there are other industrial units. So if you can see where my cursor is, there's the site. We've got other units along there and along there, so that it's kind of screened from there, if that makes any difference.
If I can come back on that general point, normally if there's what we call a B2 use, which is an industrial use, then normally we wouldn't be imposing planning conditions restricting operating hours. Those sites have been designated for an industrial use, and I would imagine, although I don't have any evidence, that the majority of businesses operating on that site are not restricted by any noise conditions. We've imposed a noise condition, an hours condition on the original permission, and that's kind of a standard condition with standard Saturday working hours, and we consider that condition should be carried forward for this new permission, because we don't have any evidence that any different working hours will, or the existing working hours that we condition, will cause any harm. So the recommendation is to carry that condition forward that restricts Sunday and evening working.
Chair, if I may just come back on that, can I just ask the question of, as I said earlier, we need to be sort of mindful of our neighbours. The complaints that we've had that you referred to earlier, Neil, were they attributed to that, and what systems have we got in place to monitor that? I want to be able to demonstrate to the community of Norfolk that we are mindful of these things moving forward.
Well, we've not received any complaints from any residents in the area. The complaints have come from the other businesses within Borough Way, and put it into context that there's three complaint objectors in the entire site. So yeah, it's not been the residential areas that have complained, but it hasn't been around hours of operation, the early start, the 7 o'clock start. It's primarily been around noise, dust and water.
Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. So once again, 2 short ones. Once again, following on from Councillor Whedon, they're to do with not just public but business convenience as well. So it's a shared estate. We've had complaints from people due to the operations of the business already. Do you think if we fail to address these complaints or deeply consider them, that could deter other businesses in the future from moving to that location, knowing that there is a potential hindrance? And the second one relates to this telegraph pole why would we look to potentially lose the best part of 2 feet of a walkway where we know pathways are quite tight, especially on an industrial area where there's going to be a lot of footfall, when we could potentially seek to, I don't know the technical aspects of this, but maybe move the telegraph pole? Surely that would be a lot more convenient in some aspects than removing a lot of the highway and causing a lot more interruption.
I can probably help with the telegraph pole question. The footway was initially proposed at 2 metres width, which is, if you like, our full fat public footway recommendation. That it's aimed at enabling 2 wheelchairs to pass in opposite directions. So you tend to, well, you don't tend. The minimum width we require for a wheelchair to safely traverse a footway is 900 millimetres, 3 foot. So whilst it's disappointing that the applicant hasn't been able to provide a 2 metre footway, the 1.4 metres is sufficient for pedestrians to safely pass and repass.
Thank you. Sorry, can I come back to that, Chair? So is it 2 metres in place at this moment in time?
I haven't visited the site to check, but looking at the photographs, it appears that the footway has been constructed. My assumption is they're applying for what they've actually achieved, what they've delivered.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So can I confirm a measurement of what's there at place?
It's already at the 1.4.
So there's no actual variation then to this pathway? That's what's going in?
It's been built, so it was previously approved at 2 metres, but it's been built at 1.4 metres to accommodate the pearl.
So can you see what I'm saying here? So we're putting through things. Now that, to me, if I was a member of the public, especially knowing that nowadays a lot of these wheelchair designs are done on retrospective and historic designs. They don't factor in all motorised, dementia-based chairs, which can be a lot wider. So we could potentially be taking away 600 millimetres of public footway and accessibility to encourage people using that area when it was previously put in for 2. Do you see where I'm going with this? So
I can, yeah. The only caveat I would have to that is looking at the slides there, and you can see the photograph of the footpath itself. It literally just leads into this site. It's a footpath which was put in for the purpose of pedestrians walking to this site, if that helps in any way. Just on, sorry, on the other question regarding consideration of the neighbours, it was considered. It's considered in the assessment, but the statutory consultee in terms of amenity and emissions is the Environment Agency, and whilst there has been issues, as I say, that they're comfortable and they didn't object on the basis that they think that the emissions can be controlled.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Councillor Webber.
Condition 4 relates to lighting. This business has been operating with non-compliant lighting now for a period of time. I presume the business is also aware of the condition that you're proposing. Do we really need to allow them 3 months to submit a plan for rectification? Isn't that overly generous?
Sorry, I'm still switched on, I didn't realise. So there's a difference with this application in this retrospective planning application. Normally, we wouldn't allow any development to commence until details have been submitted and approved. But on this, because it's retrospective, we're going to have to get details and approve them. So some of that responsibility may rest with the planning authority within that 3-month period to make sure the plans are approved. So that's why that condition is worded as it is.
The way I read that is that the plan must be submitted within 3 months. It's not actually having agreed the plan. Oh, it does say submitted and approved. Sorry, okay.
Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, given the rural area of Thetford, they quite often suffer from poor phone reception, 3G, 4G. I've noticed in close proximity to the site there are 3G and 4G masts. Now, the equipment that's going to be used on this site and has been used on this site since 2023 would admit electronic fields which would interfere with such phone signals. Was they are considered as part of the consultation, or have they reported any issues ongoing with that in drops of signal in the area? Because that kind of environment would create those issues. I was wondering if that was being brought to the council at all.
The phone companies wouldn't have been consulted on the application, so it's unknown.
Any more questions? Councillor White.
Sorry, Chair, me again. So regarding, following on from Councillor Webber, with regards to the lighting, I agree. I mean, 3 months we've been going through a planning and there's potentially been a breach of this and it's been known for a while. So one would ask why there's not been rectification requests for this earlier before we award planning, knowing that there's previously been breaches and non-compliance.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all. And in a perfect world, we'd have those details now and in front of us, but that would delay determination in the application, which we shouldn't be doing. We would have to consult on those lighting details once received. So, particularly our landscape ecology officers that want to make sure that they're effective. We don't have an impact on habitat and species from lighting and indeed spill out from a wider area. So there is a process to go through. We have to be reasonable when imposing a planning condition, and therefore we consider 3 months as a standard time period, 12 weeks to be to have receipt of the details, consult, and then be minded to approve, provided those details are worthy of approval.
Thank you, Richard. Once again, it seems a bit backwards to me because we're being asked to grant something before we know what's actually going to be complied with, knowing that there's a previous history of non-compliance. And that does concern me, that this should have been part of an application and considered, knowing it was a previous outstanding requirement, that we're still to have it and we're at a decision-making panel today.
I'll come back on that point. Yeah, again, I don't disagree with you, but in terms of practice, we've got to deal with what we have in front of us at a point in time on its own merits. Hence, that's why we're imposing a condition to make sure we get those details. Those details don't come in or are not worthy of approval, then we could potentially down an enforcement line, a breach of condition line, etc., taking action to ensure that happens. So at this point in time, we've got to react to what we're given and determine what's in front of us.
Councillor Whedon.
Thank you, Chair. May I ask you to ask our monitoring officer, is there the opportunity for us to have a short adjournment before this goes to the vote? I don't know if the Constitution allows that.
Yes, we can.
Once we get to that stage, then, can I propose that we have a short adjournment?
We will. Councillor White seconded that. Yes, of course. So I propose an adjournment before we go to voting on this matter. Could I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor White. Any more questions from the committee members to the planning officer before we hear from our registered speaker? No? Oh. Councillor Matthews.
Pardon me, I didn't even know this was on. One question, and it concerns where I've in times past had experience with construction sites. Bearing in mind in terrible weather conditions, vehicle movement back and forward on terrain stores up an awful lot of mud, if nothing else. What facilities are available on that site for lorry transportation in and out, as the case might be, carrying unwanted waste material out onto the main thoroughfare, especially if you're going to use the A11?
Sorry, I can't remember whether there's a wheel wash on this site or not, but maybe, I don't think there is. I think it was considered in the round, so apologies, but I think it was considered acceptable at the first previous application. So, yeah, I think in highways terms it's been considered to be acceptable given the development or the operations on site. I'm not aware of there being any issues being reported since it's been in operation, and it's been in operation for a while now, if that helps.
Councillor White.
Me again, Chair. Councillor Matthews has raised a valid point regarding the debris on the highways. What policies or plans are in place to ensure that the vehicles are operating safely and securely, for instance, covering the loads during transport? Will there be anything in place to make sure that there's compliance there to stop any unnecessary debris falling onto the highway?
Well, during the monitoring, we check to see that they're sheeted. I'm just checking to see whether there's a condition about vehicles as they leave the site.
Because I would have thought that would have been some form of industry practice to make sure under safety grounds before they go onto the highway. But equally, I agree, something like a wheel wash where you're, you know, should be potentially considered for most of these sort of sites.
Yeah, I think in this instance, we are where we are, that the previous planning application didn't have those facilities provided for, and it's not being proposed in this one either.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just come back a little bit further on that point. Normally, we're in an industrial area, so there's very little risk of mud and debris being tracked onto the public highway. Yeah, it's an aggregate recycling facility with a concrete underlay. So normally we wouldn't be imposing conditions like that on applications such as this. But with mineral sites in rural areas and such like, it's very different, and we would do that. There are obviously conditions have to go on for the reasons, the 6 reasons that we specified, and we didn't have any concerns raised by the Highway Authority. But I will say on behalf of the Highway Authority, under the Highways Act, there are provisions under the Highways Act to take action if mud and debris is spilt onto the public highway and causes a safety concern.
Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Richard. I agree. So there are provisions under the highways, you know, to make sure we are safeguarding that. But sometimes prevention is better than cure. And when we start having to talk about enforcement, it would be better just to have an understanding of that beforehand, so we know where we're at. And realistically, one would assume if you're dealing with some form of raw materials, there may still be some form of debris coming in from that load as it's being transported in and out. You're saying that there's a washdown for a slurry, you know, to essentially a silt deposit. So there's obviously going to be some form of discharging on there that could potentially come out. Thank you.
Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, I mentioned that. If you go on to slides 10 and 18, you can actually see the road condition there, which to me it looks like a mixture of dirt, which is tracked the whole way up to the heavy goods vehicle turning into the road. And it looks like the road itself is degraded. So I think this argument we're having is quite clearly demonstrated in this slide that there is clearly an issue with debris being carried out onto the road. Any comments on that?
Whilst any deposits on or degradation to the carriageway are undesirable, it's possibly worth bringing to your attention that the Burrell Way industrial estate isn't actually highway. The lorries would first join the highway when they reach London Road, the former A11.
Councillor White.
Thank you. So just on that one, thank you very much. So essentially, what we're indirectly saying here is we're discharging our right because it's private land to ensure that that's safe up until the point of the carriageway. What about the other people who have rights of access over that road that would expect that to still be maintained and clear?
I think that's a very fair question, but probably not one that the Highway Authority can reasonably answer, I'm afraid. Sorry.
Thank you.
Any more questions from the members? No? Okay. So we'll move on now to hear from the registered speaker, who is Jane Stewart from JMJ Planning. And Jane, you have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you for considering this application today and allowing us to speak. Whilst the changes subject to this application are retrospective, they mainly relate to the wash plant. I'd just like to highlight that other key elements of the scheme, including the acoustic fencing bordering the woodland, demolition to part of the larger building. So the building on site was an existing building and it was double in size, so part of it has been demolished. The recladding of the remaining building and erection of taller fencing to screen, provide further acoustic mitigation and to improve the visual aesthetics of the site from the public realm, which is on London Road, because, as it's been said, Borough Way as a private road remain unchanged. And in terms of the lighting scheme, I'd like to confirm that we have submitted what is in situ on site, and that has included a lighting assessment which confirms that it won't impact on the ecology. So the reason why that is conditioned is the Environmental Health Officer has asked for the lighting to be hooded. So therefore there's a condition to submit those details to be agreed. I wanted just to explain a little bit about why we've ended up in this situation. So upon approval of the application in 2023, the wash plant specification was effectively an off-the-shelf design, typically used for primary aggregates in quarries, which is where you mainly find these sites, but they're all temporary consented for the life of the quarries. So as an industry, we need these sites, permanent sites, and as has been said, your policy drives these sites to industrial locations. It was only when the applicant went out to tender for providing a wash plant to suit its use were they advised that they needed a bespoke design. The design was developed by a team of specialists and was in some respects iterative given its use for recycling inert waste. So recycling is really important in today's climate, as most plants are designed to handle primary aggregate. So commissioning took longer than anticipated as the plant was refined to enhance its effectiveness and efficiency. And while some layout changes and lighting has been added to accommodate the wash plant, all the assessments, noise assessments, dust assessments, confirm these don't have any additional impact from what is already consented, and that's quite an important point. And in fact, the noise was better in terms of, and noise is difficult because it's perceived noise, so it doesn't necessarily mean that when you do the noise assessment, you have to comply with certain regulations and limits, and the site complies with those. So initially, the silt bays, there wasn't a silt press included as part of the design. The silt was going to be dried in silt bays. So those silt bays were built to dry out the silts, but it soon became evident they were not effective at removing enough water and the silts remained saturated. This would limit the throughput into the site and the use of those silts in construction. So the wash plant designers suggested a silt press, which was a significant investment, but is the best technology to remove and recycle water effectively, speedily, and leaves a silt that can be used, for example, as puddle clay and in A2 fill for use in construction. And as noted in the officer's report, the silt press was sensitively clad with the same cladding as the site building to blend in with the rest of the site. The plant at Thetford is an innovative leader in the construction, demolition, recycling evolution. It will save approximately 50,000 tonnes a year from landfill and will supply 100,000 tonnes per year of essential recycled products for construction. This will help conserve primary aggregate where critical shortfalls are likely as of 2042 in 16 years, with some research suggesting the world could run out of usable sand by 2050. And to highlight the significance of this project, as we all know, conservation of our natural resources is not only a local issue but a global issue, and the site has hosted visitors from Norway, Sweden, Belgium, West and East Coast USA and the UAE, as well as organisations and companies from the UK and Ireland, all of whom are interested in how they can wash and recycle the inert soil and rubble that's created through construction.
Just to let you know, Jane, you have had your 5 minutes. If you are able to start wrapping up,
yeah.
I'd be grateful.
As well as make better use of silts. The plant is a critical contributor to the circular economy and provides a valuable contribution to the supply of sustainable construction materials. Thank you.
Thank you. So committee members, if you have any points of clarification that you would like to ask to Jane, if you raise your hand, please. Councillor Webber.
Thank you for that very informative and helpful contribution. I mean, I do have one question. If I have planning permission to build a new house and I decide to double the height of it and put the house in a different position on the plot, I would probably ask for planning permission in advance. Why didn't that happen in this case?
We went out to tender. We went to 9 companies originally to look at this wash plant. We got it down to 3. And then we got the permission. And then only then can I go to the companies and say, I want to place an order. Can you do me technical drawings? And it changed. And it would have just changed the timescales and we'd probably lost the opportunity. So that's why we built as we did. And then, as Jane said, the silt press came because we wanted to do something that was better and more innovative and use the water and use the silt.
Councillor White.
Thank you, and thank you very much for supplying that additional information. So, following on once again, so you said that the original design was sort of like a boilerplate design. Is that correct? So the sort of layout, the equipment and how it was?
Yeah, the layout was as if it was in a primary aggregate, so in a virgin quarry. So it was a much easier process because I couldn't go to design until I'd sort of got something to go to talk to people about what I really wanted to do.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And I appreciate that as businesses evolve, they become more efficient and they realise what they actually need. But it just seems to me to put, as you said, in your words, an expensive piece of equipment in without seeking planning, which is something that's clear. No, that's what I was going to ask. So would something like that have been essential to the original planning? Did that equipment exist when the original boiler templates were there? Could that have been something that could have been foreseen to have been needed in the future?
No, the silt could have been dealt with as the original planning, but it just wasn't efficient. It was mean we'd be losing a lot of the water we wanted back in the process. And we'd have been sort of having to tanker that off to other sites to lagoon it, which is not a good sustainable use for it, and health and safety wise it's not the best advantage either. So it's better to press it on site, turn it into a dry cake, reuse the water in the process, and then transport an easier material back to construction for lining lagoons, restoration of quarries, embankment works, what an A2 fill material is used for.
Thank you. So would you say having that equipment on site allows you to then reduce your road footprint from travel, from additional vehicles conveying from site to site? You see what I mean? So you bring a lot more on site and combine it in one area instead of having to go external?
No, we can't bring more onto site, but what it means is we're not moving some sloppier material off that would hold water that we're pressing and then reusing on the site.
Sorry, that's what I meant. So it saves you having to take stuff off to bring it back. Essentially, you can do it all in one place. So
that's
essentially,
correct.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we're not moving the water that we want to keep on site and reuse. We're not letting it go to a lagoon where it'll evaporate or sit there as a sludge.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the members? No? Would the planning officers like to respond to anything that's been presented?
I haven't got anything further to say.
Thank you. So, committee members, what we'll do now is move into the debate. You've had the opportunity to ask questions, so if you do want to contribute to the debate, then please raise your hands. Councillor White.
Are we having the adjournment, Chair?
I thought the adjournment was before we vote. Yeah. Yeah, so we'll have the debate now, then we'll adjourn. No points for debate. Okay, very well. Okay. So propose that we now adjourn for 10 minutes. So if Councillor Whedon would like to propose the adjournment again.
Yeah, certainly, Chair. Excuse me. Certainly, Chair. Can I propose we please have a 10-minute adjournment before we vote?
Can we have a seconder?
Can I second that, Chair?
Thank you, Councillor White. Yeah, we'll adjourn now for 10 minutes. So the meeting has been reconvened. So to committee members, we're now at the stage of moving to the recommendations and to vote on those. I'll just remind everybody what they are. So the recommendations in the report are that the lead director for communities and environment be authorised to firstly grant planning permission subject to the conditions outlined in section 10. Secondly, to discharge conditions where those detailed above require the submission and implementation of a scheme or further details, either before development commences or within a specified date of planning permission being granted. And thirdly, delegate powers to officers to deal with any non-material amendments to the application that may be submitted. Can I ask members to please raise their hand if they are in favour with the recommendations? Thank you. Please raise your hands if you're against. Any abstentions?
Point of order, Madam Chair. We do agree, but we wish to discuss the conditions on the agreement.
Yeah, it's Councillor White. The committee has just approved the recommendations, so the opportunity to now put forward any amendments, I think, and I'm looking at our legal officer, is gone.
Because we wasn't asked to vote on whether we agree with conditions, we was only whether we approve or not.
Chair read out the recommendation as proposed in the papers and put that to a vote, and members have now casted their vote.
So the recommendations are carried. We'll take a 5-minute adjournment just to allow the speakers to exit the chamber. Thank you. Thank you. The meeting is reconvened. Just before we move to item 6 on the agenda, just to be really clear for committee members, the running order of the meeting is that we will hear from the planning officer. You will have the opportunity to ask questions for clarification, and we don't have any registered speakers for this item, so we will then move into the debate. Now, if you, before we get to the vote, if you have any comments that you wish to make or suggestions for amendments, the time to do that is during the debating section. All right? So, turning now to item 6, reference FUL 2026-0005. This is Standing Hall Quarry, Norwich Road, Horsted, and I'll invite the planning officer to give us a presentation.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. So planning permission is sought under Section 73 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990 for the amendment of the restoration scheme to include an agricultural irrigation reservoir at the westernmost part of Standing Hall Quarry. So Section 73 of the Act allows an applicant to apply for non-compliance with one or more of the current planning conditions. In this case, the two conditions the applicant seeks non-compliance with are Condition 2, so that relates to the approved plans and drawings which will need to be updated to facilitate the amended restoration drawing, and also Condition 22, which pertains to the approved scheme for managing bird strike risk, which needs to be updated given the proposal to create a new water body which may attract nesting birds or feeding birds and the proximity to Norwich Airport. The proposal does not seek to delay the time frame for restoration, which is still going to be required by 2038, only the nature and the landform of the restoration scheme. As you can see, this illustrates the application site as outlined in red. In relation to, you've got Norwich Airport, you can just see down here. And subject to the implementation of the applicant's updated bird hazard management scheme, the airport does not object to the proposals. I've also labelled on, so you've got most of the, or the vast majority of the mineral extracted is exported on the B1150, North Walsham Road, and then that comes down to onward distribution on the NDR or Borderland Northway. The quarry itself is wholly within the Horsted with Standing Hall parish, lying just to the south of Coltishall you've got up here. Just zooming in, this gives an overview of the application site and the context of the proposed location of the reservoir, which we've outlined with a blue dotted line in the wider quarry. The total area of the permitted mineral working, as shown by the red line, is 106 hectares after it was extended in 2021. The proposed area of the reservoir the land take would be approximately 2 hectares in size. I've also indicated the two nearest residential dwellings, the Hollies and Hill Farm, further to the north. I just want to give you an overview of the extent of the current mineral extraction with working currently taking place here. It's moving in a clockwise direction around the mineral working. So yeah, these will be the next phases moving in this direction. Just as a bit of background, once extracted mineral is hauled to the plant site, which I've illustrated a photo there. It's washed, graded and processed before being transported from the site to wherever the market is at that time. And as you can see, the site is split into a number of eight phases, and the reservoir would be delivered in this westernmost part of the site here. So just to give you a visualisation, this is taken from the southern end of the quarry, just looking in a northwesterly view across the site. I've highlighted the Hollies, which you can see in the distance, and the reservoir would be located just to this area to the left here. The area in the foreground here is one of the lagoons that form part of the silt storage, and the water recycling operation that the quarry uses this doesn't form part of the final landform. This is an area where the silt is drying out, and it would be eventually returned to agricultural land. So this shows the extent of the proposed site within the quarry itself. As I've stated in the report, whilst soil has been stripped from the land, the area underneath was found to be largely barren of any mineral. So a cut and fill operation would be used to engineer the void of the reservoir using the surplus material that is uneconomic to process or sell. The void would then be sealed with a butyl liner in order to retain the water. The reservoir would be filled in winter months from existing ground or surface water sources, and that would then enable the farmer, who's the landowner, to store up to 100,000 metre cubed of water, and that would reduce the reliance of groundwater abstraction to irrigate crops in the summer months when the water is scarcer. In addition, access to the reservoir would be secured by a 1.5 metre deer-proof fence, and also would prevent any people wandering into the site and getting into difficulties. So this is taken just looking slightly further back, and again shows the area that would be consumed by the water body. Again, I've highlighted the Hollies here, which is the nearest residential dwelling. It's actually owned by the farm estate, and it's occupied by the farm manager, and there's been no objection or complaint about this application. I just wanted to include a section of the reservoir which would be between 10 to 12 metres above ordnance datum in depth, and the maximum resting water level would be 16 metres AOD, so it would be sort of 4 to 6 metres depending on how much the water has been used in the summer months to irrigate the surrounding farmland. Here I've got a slide of the final proposed restored landform, which the reservoir would only, as you can see, it would only consume a small part, with the rest largely returned to productive agricultural use. That would be by 2038, and then the reservoir would support the irrigation of that land, and beyond that, the wider farming estate. So it's not just this land; they own quite an extensive estate, which would be irrigated by that reservoir. I just wanted to show you this as an example of another similar scheme at a different site which is coming to fruition. So this one's at Spixworth Quarry, so that's a different site, and this one is it's about 50% bigger. This would be 150,000 cubic metre capacity, and you can see again it's not complete, but you can see once the void is engineered, it's then lined to retain the water in situ. And again, it's got a similar stock-proof fencing around the perimeter of it just to secure the site. In conclusion, significant weight is given in the planning balance to the sustainability benefits of this proposal that would have for the wider landholding in reducing their reliability on groundwater extraction when water is scarcer, and instead creating a greater resilience to potential water shortages, and that's caused by both climate change and competing needs such as new housing that also has an impact on water supply and availability. I hope you picked up in the report the scheme is also supported by the Environment Agency. So in conclusion, subject to the implementation of appropriate conditions, it's considered that the proposal would not create any adverse impacts, and as such is in accordance with the development plan policies identified and national policy. And there are no material considerations that indicate that application should be refused, and accordingly permission is recommended to be approved in accordance with the conditions set out at section 10 of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph. So to committee members then, opportunity now for you to ask any questions of the planning officer about the presentation. Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ralph. So with regards to the reservoir, I note that you said that it's for water security and to help stop drought. Is it only the farm owner or the landowner that's going to benefit from that, or will that affect other people within the area? Because I know, obviously, the farmer not drawing so much will affect, but will, in an emergency or a water shortage, do other people have rights to that water as well, or just the farmer?
No, they wouldn't have any rights. It would be exclusively just for irrigation of that farmland and the wider farming estate, really. So yeah, there wouldn't be any public benefits of it in that respect. But as you allude to, it would reduce the reliance on water resources elsewhere for, as I said, housing and other new developments.
Thank you.
Councillor Webber.
Does or is the application supported by any sort of hydrology reports to show that the reservoir will fill as planned, given the surrounding landscape?
Yeah, As part of the original application, which we determined it lodged in 2020 and we determined in 2021 was subject to an extensive environmental impact assessment, and as part of that they've done an updated environmental addendum, which is why this is before members today, obviously on the basis there's no public objections, but it did have a extensive hydrology section underlining and setting out which water bodies this would continue to extract water from and assessing the impact on those, and it was, as I said, it was supported by the Environment Agency in terms of the proposal, and equally, whilst the proposal is above a groundwater protection zone, obviously it has the liner to prevent any egress below that into the water bodies that might be impacted.
Councillor Neil.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand 7.32 about the airport, and then you've got a condition 22, which I haven't got the foggiest what it means. Could you explain that?
Yeah, I haven't got the report in front of me, but so in essence, as I said, this is a development that could attract feeding birds due to it's a large water body. And it was a departure from the original restoration scheme that was solely to agriculture and other grassland and amenity land. So what the applicant did is they updated their bird hazard management plan, which will condition, and I think it's now condition 21. I moved in the condition schedule, but it's a series of ongoing measures. So it's not one-off measures. They need to there's maintenance, and there's ongoing requirements for the landowner and operator to make sure the reservoir doesn't attract birds and create a bird strike risk for the airport. But as I set out in the report, subject to that bird hazard management plan being strictly followed, the airport raised no objection to the proposal.
Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. Well, with regards to the reservoir obviously holding a substantial amount of water, what's the discharge plan should that ever we have, well, the chances I know are low, but I live in a flood risk area and I know the chance does happen. So what mitigation is there should that reservoir ever get to the point of breaching? How does it safely discharge and where will it go?
It was considered a very minimal risk of flooding, but obviously built into it, because it's recharged from surrounding water resources. There's a 1 metre freeboard which would prevent or reduce the risk of flooding incidents. But in the event it did get breach that 1 metre freeboard, obviously it would be for the landowner to, I think you'd have to irrigate it onto the land and disperse it in that way. But it is very minimal chance of flood risk. I can't remember the exact, it was 1 in 1,000, I think, or 1 in 100, but it was a low chance of flood risk.
1 in 100 doesn't seem low to me. 1 in a million, maybe. 1 in 100. No, thank you for that. So just to make sure that any flooding would potentially remain localised on the landowner and not affect anywhere else.
Yeah, no, it wouldn't be a risk.
Councillor Williams.
Hiya. Thank you, Chair. What I'd like to ask you is about the signage around there and the fence. We know it's for the farmer, but there could be, like you say, kids get on the site, isn't it? What's about that?
Yeah, so it's a very good question. So as I said, I've asked for a specification of the fence to be submitted as, I think, it's possibly condition 28, so we can approve that before the reservoir is delivered. But the one I visited locally is a very substantial fence with a secure gate which couldn't be breached without the farm owner's permission. And so principally it was there to prevent deer or other livestock getting into the reservoir, but equally it would serve the same purpose of people who might accidentally or on purpose decide they want to enter the site. But I haven't got any details of the fence, the signage that would be provided.
I was just concerned about the heat waves and people going in deep water because 6 metres plus 1 maybe.
Yeah, but it's, as I said, I think the fencing would do that job of deterring people from entering the reservoir.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Neil.
Yes, sorry, love. That was my original, I asked you before. it says on here under condition 22, but that should be condition 21, should it?
Yeah, so in terms of the bird hazard management plan, it was originally condition 22 of the original permission, and I think because we've lost the first condition, which is the implementation date, they've all shifted up one, and it's now, I think, it's condition 21 on the permission that requires compliance with that plan.
Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, given the elevation of the property, the Hollies there, I'm now not privy to whether that is owned by the landowner as well. Obviously, where I live, there's plenty of reservoirs that are well hidden from view. Given the elevation of that property, has any consideration been taken into whether that reservoir will be seen from the owners of the property and if there's any landscaping being put in to screen it?
Through the environmental statement addendum, that concluded that the reservoir would be seen from the second floor of the Hollies. But as I said, it's a small part of a wider restoration scheme, and it's owned by the farming estate, and it was occupied by the farm manager. So hence why we've not had an objection. But it's not required. In conclusion, it's not an unacceptable landscape impact.
Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. Me again, Ralph. So, noting that we're taking a lot of steps to safeguard with like deer fencing and so forth, to keep the public away, is there going to be any restriction on this permission that potentially stops this being used in the future for public land, i.e. turning into something like a fishery or an amenity?
Yeah, it's a good question. So just on the essence of the entire restoration plan, it's to be returned to productive agricultural use, so there's no amenity or public access proposed. And I don't think it'd be of the nature as an agricultural reservoir that the farmer or landowner would welcome local people trespassing onto the site or otherwise to visit the reservoir. Hence why the security measures are in place to safeguard it from any future pedestrian people or animals.
Thank you. Now, the only reason I ask is because I know obviously Cemex, as an example, they have a lot of quarries which are used for fishing, and I know eventually these can be converted. So obviously, is there a plan to make sure that it has to stay in its way for a X amount of years subject to approval, or once we've approved that?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the entire restoration scheme is required to be delivered by 2038, and the reservoir would be delivered before then, so the farm holding can make use of it. And after 2038, it goes into a period called aftercare, where we continue to monitor the site and ensure that the agricultural land has been delivered to a quality that they can continue farming and productively farm on that land. After that, it goes back to countryside status, and we'd have no further recourse to monitor it or be involved in it. So, but in terms of what our planning function is, we have to be content that it's been delivered to agricultural land with the reservoir, and then after that, our duties to inspect it or require it to be determined that cease. And as I say, it's countryside.
So, just a final point on that one, if that's okay. So, on that one, for example, if we was to look at conditions on time frame, so you're saying 2038 is a restoration point. Are we allowed to turn around and say from the point it goes as a reservoir, as an example, that it must be protected and kept as that for a period of time to make sure that we do actually see the benefits of the ecology, the ecosystem growing and so forth?
I think that restoration plan it sort of exists in perpetuity. But it wouldn't stop, I wouldn't imagine the farm owner would depart from that, but it wouldn't stop someone else from coming along with an application, so in 2043, and for an alternative use, but obviously that would have to be assessed on its own merits, and in the planning round, whether there's benefits or not of losing the reservoir or changing its use, but that would have to be fully assessed through the planning process.
Thank you. The only reason I ask is because land changes ownership over time.
Yeah, exactly.
Any other questions for the planning officer? No. Okay, so as we've got no speakers or registered speakers for this item, we'll now move into the debating part of the meeting. So if you'd like to comment on any aspect of the recommendations, please raise your hand. Councillor White.
Thank you. I feel like I've got a spring-loaded hand on this button at the moment. I like it in principle. I think it's great. We obviously need to have nature restored. We need reservoir. We need water security. I am also a bit uneasy the fact that obviously one person or one estate tends to potentially benefit. I know it's in that way. So just to make sure that we do get that nature that they're saying, I would like to potentially see some form of protection put on that it must remain as a reservoir for a period of time, just to make sure that we do get that ecology and that promise, if that is within our power to do so.
Yeah, I'll just respond on that. We kind of tie by rules around what we can and can't do in specifying a use has to remain in perpetuity, and it will be outside planning law for us to be able to do that. To add to Ralph's comment about after the aftercare period expires, we as a Mineral Planning Authority wouldn't necessarily wash our hands of this and forget about it, because if there were any future proposals that suggested an alternative use for this site, then we would be consulted as a Mineral Planning Authority for our views on that. And we could object at that time to say that, you know, let's say housing was proposed on this site, that it would be undoing a valuable restoration and shouldn't be allowed. But I can't predict the future, but we can only regulate what we're allowed to regulate, and insisting a land use remains in perpetuity is outside what we can do.
Thank you.
Anything else from the members? No? Very well. We'll now move to vote on the recommendations as set out in the report. I'll just remind everybody what these are. That the Lead Director for Communities and Environment be authorised to firstly grant planning permission, subject to the conditions outlined in section 10 of the report, to discharge conditions where those detailed above require the submission and implementation of a scheme or further details, either before development commences or within a specified date of planning permission being granted. Delegate powers to officers to deal with any non-material amendments to the application that may be submitted. So could I ask members to please raise their hands if they're in favour of the recommendations? That's unanimous, thank you. The recommendations are carried. So that brings us to the end of today's meeting. I'd like to thank everybody for their time and their contribution. And the next meeting of the Planning and Regulation Committee will be held here at County Hall on Friday, the 17th of July 2026 at 10 a.m. Thank you. Meeting's closed.